Oh, we now welcome in ESPN NFL draft expert, fantasy football guru, Field Yates. Field, thanks for hopping on with us on Championship Monday here.
Glad to do it, gentlemen. Always looking forward to talking football, and I'm already sad about the fact that we're going to have to wait, 8 months until we see a college football game once again. That being said, we certainly enjoyed this season, and we can't wait for what's on tap with the pre-draft cycle.
No question about it. Let's get to some of that pre-draft stuff here because we'll talk about the two teams that played on the field today. In the common draft era, both Ohio State and Notre Dame have had over 300 players drafted. Ohio State has had 78 first-round players drafted. This year's Ohio State team could make some history. You go back to that 22 Georgia team that had 15 players drafted. Who should we be keeping an eye out for on the Ohio State side specifically come April in the NFL draft?
Yeah, so we'll see on a couple of the decisions as far as guys who still have some eligibility left and might return to Ohio State. But as far as the guys that seem like they're no doubters, they are either out of eligibility or they are definitely coming out. In the first round, you're talking about close to 5 players who may end up going in round 1. Donovan Jackson, who's been playing left tackle for the Ohio State Buckeyes after being a career-long left guard. I think he has a real chance to go in the first round. The reason why he is playing left tackle is because Josh Simmons, who, in terms of talent alone, is a lock to be a first-round pick. He is out for the year because of a patella injury. Assuming that patella injury continues to heal as scheduled, I think Josh Simmons goes in the first round for Ohio State as well. And then Emeka Ebuka, who became during the national championship Ohio State's #1 receiving leader in terms of receptions in school history. Another guy who's got sort of top 25-ish upside. And then JT Tuimoa, who ended up returning for one last season at Ohio State this year after I thought he might have a chance to be a top 50 pick last year. A guy that I think also has a chance to go somewhere in round 1. They've just got incredible depth on this roster.
Yeah, and you mentioned Emeka Ebuka. Well, what about the guy that's throwing him the ball? We just saw what Will Howard did. Starting off the game, going 13 for 13, the most ever in a national championship game. There's been rumbles about where he would end up in the draft, and from this game, he's most definitely made some money for himself, as we saw you tweet on Twitter. So where do you see him going in the draft, and is he at all a first-round talent?
Ooh.
I think he's more of a day 3 guy, Scoob. I think that this is a player who has improved his draft stock, specifically in the college football playoff. He's played well. It's obviously been an incredible run for this entire Ohio State team. You know, with Will, there are some traits that I think we all recognize are pretty unique. This is a good athlete at the quarterback spot. He's very experienced, which we're starting to see some NFL teams prioritize that. Obviously played a long time at Kansas State before this season at Ohio State. Largely good decision-making, largely good accuracy. Hasn't been this consistent as a thrower as he has been, as he was tonight against Notre Dame. But a guy who I think in a draft that's really looking for a few extra bodies after Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders to kind of really solidify themselves as draft-worthy quarterbacks. I think Will Howard kind of enters that conversation. I think he's got a chance to go somewhere early in day 3. In the best-case scenario, maybe more like the 5th or 6th round, depending on how things shake out.
Yeah, and he's got a spoil of riches when you talk about the wide receiving position, and the best wide receiver that they have isn't even eligible to go into the NFL draft. Jeremiah Smith is a freak, 6'3", 215 pounds. Let's talk hypothetical. If he was in this year's draft, where do you see Jeremiah Smith going?
Yeah, probably hard for me to see him falling outside of the top 3. Definitely not the top 5.
Wow.
You know, a lot of people have been saying he would be the slam dunk #1 pick, which it's possible. It certainly is. This guy is unique. He's special. He did a lot of it this season at the age of 17. He finally turned 18. He is apparently coming of age. He's going to dominate college football for the next 2 seasons. The only other players that are in this draft that I think have a chance to, or would have a chance in this hypothetical to go ahead of Jeremiah Smith are Travis Hunter and also Abdul Carter. Hunter, you know, the Heisman Trophy winner, the fact that he can play 2 different positions. We'll see what he does at the NFL level, but to have the capacity to be an all-pro type player as a corner or a wide receiver, really special player, really special talent, outstanding character as well. And then Abdul Carter from Penn State, you know, plays the money position. If you're not a quarterback, probably the most valuable non-quarterback position in the NFL is pass rusher. He was kind of on the Micah Parsons path early in his Penn State career, playing stand-up inside linebacker. move during his final season to an edge rusher or number 11, like Micah Parsons did and does. The comparisons are going to keep going throughout the next few months here for Micah Parsons and Abdul Carter. I don't know that I see it quite that similarly. I do think that Micah was a bigger statured guy by a little bit, maybe had 8 or 10 pounds on Abdul Carter, but hey, that guy is super impressive. To me, looks like a top 5 lock. So I think those would be the 3 names we'll be talking about if Jeremiah Smith were in this year's draft somehow.
We've seen a return of the back, so to speak, in the NFL with guys like Saquon, Derrick Henry, Bijan Robinson playing extremely well this NFL football season. What are your thoughts on Travion Henderson and his projections to the next level? And also your thoughts, too, on Quinshon Judkins, who's only a junior, and is it possible for him to come out this year and make an impact in this year's draft?
Yeah, my expectation has been that Quinshon will declare, still has a chance to return to Ohio State, but certainly seemed like he was on the 1 year and then let's head to the NFL path during his time in Columbus. One of the things about this year's draft class that I think is really going to determine where these backs end up, there are actually 2 factors. One is the depth. There is just outstanding depth in this year's running back class. Wasn't a great class last year. This one is a really, really strong class. And I do think we'll see at least one taken in the first round, that, of course, being Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. But I think everything from there is going to be determined by 2 factors. Is you're going to say to yourself as a GM, I could take a guy in the 2nd round, but I might get really good value on a player that's not that much worse in the 4th round. On top of that, I think this is the more important point, is it's going to come down to scheme and style and fit. Judkins, a guy who's probably got a little bit more sort of like loose athletic ability to him than Travion Henderson, who's got these nimble feet but has a bit more power. He's a 5-star player coming out of high school from the state of Virginia, is Travion Henderson. Both of these guys have tons of pedigree, a little bit of just sort of a stylistic difference. And when you factor those 2 players into a class that also includes guys that have great size and power, you've got guys that are more scat backs, you've got guys that may not necessarily have top end size or speed, but just find a way to drag defenders like Cam Scatabo from Arizona State. You're going to see all sorts of varying opinions about where these guys deserve to go, really based off of what kind of offense you play.
Going to be a fascinating couple of months leading up to the draft at the end of April. We'll get you out here on this field. I'm curious to get your thoughts on the new world of college football with NIL, the transfer portal, and what impact it has had on the NFL, the draft process. You look at a team like Ohio State, and a ton of guys could have gone to the draft last year, decided to forego it, and try to win a national championship in 2024. What has the impact of the new era of college football had on the NFL?
Yeah, it's massive. And I'll say this. And so I build a database of players throughout the season that I watch, and I try to track them. And it's hard to place a grade of specifically where they'll go early on in the process because there's so much work left to do. But I had 368 players on my database, that I had watched and gotten a sense of prior to the announcement of the juniors or the underclassmen that had declared for the NFL draft. After I removed the players that went back to school, that number shrunk from 368 to 307 with work to do, but 61 players. I mean, nearly 20% of the guys that I had watched, or close to 20% of the guys that I had watched, decided to return to school. Now, there were a few cases of guys where it was like a real surprise because, their stock was pretty high. Some of those players might have been closer to mid-rounds, but, I think we're seeing some good decisions from these players. And I think it especially matters at some of the spots where, we sort of overanalyze or really hyperanalyze the value of them in the draft. So these quarterbacks that are opting to return to school, I think in a lot of cases can carry a lot of value. Cam Ward decided to do so this year, and he played himself into at least the conversation for the number 1 pick in the upcoming draft. So I think some of these quarterbacks made prudent decisions to stick around. Carson Beck, perhaps the most notable, going from Georgia to Miami, getting that elbow correct, and then playing better this year in 2025 than he did this past year in 2024. But the reality for some of these players is that if they can make 6 figures, maybe even closing in on 7 figures to stick around for one more year, that might more than offset the amount of money that they're going to make in the NFL as a 5th round pick or a 6th round pick, as opposed to boosting their stock potentially into a 2nd or 3rd round pick, or even in some cases a 1st round pick. So it has totally changed the landscape, and it's not a surprise when you see guys who return that 5 years ago would have never entertained that idea.
You can catch Field, Mel Kiper Jr., and Greeny on First Draft twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. NFL on ESPN YouTube channel. They're going to be on The Deuce, by the way, ESPN2, a week from today. Field Yates, we appreciate you.